In the quiet suburbs of Maplewood Estates, a shocking incident unfolded that exposed the dark underbelly of unchecked authority, a tale that resonates deeply with Americans wary of overreaching institutions. Bradley, a self-proclaimed HOA compliance officer, tased Harold Monroe, a 68-year-old retired FBI agent, on a public trail, falsely claiming it was private HOA property. Sporting a homemade badge labeled HOA Compliance Unit and citing fictitious rules like Section 14D, Bradley embodied the archetype of a petty tyrant, using intimidation to enforce non-existent bylaws. His actions weren't isolated, but part of a broader scheme orchestrated by Karen, the HOA president, who weaponized fake citations and fabricated regulations to control the neighborhood. From fining residents for trivialities like tomato vines crossing imaginary setback lines to declaring public trails off limits, their tactics preyed on the community's trust, a scenario all too familiar in American suburban life, where HOAs often blur the line between governance and oppression. The tasing of Harold, a senior with a pacemaker, wasn't just an assault. It was a calculated move to instill fear, mirroring tactics seen in real-life HOA horror stories that flood social media and local news. Bradley's casual dismissal of Harold's medical emergency, claiming he refused to comply, revealed a chilling disregard for human welfare, while Karen's silent recording of the incident from a ridge above exposed her complicity. This abuse of power thrived on the neighborhood's initial silence, as residents like Mrs. Talbot watched from afar, too intimidated to intervene. The scheme leveraged fake documents, like a compliance addendum dictating absurd rules, e.g. power tool use restricted to 7 to 9 a.m. and 3 to 5 p.m., to justify Bradley's aggression, including zip-tying threats and unauthorized surveillance cameras. This mirrors broader American anxieties about surveillance and loss of personal freedom, especially among younger adults who value autonomy. Karen's manipulation of HOA bylaws, buried in obscure footnotes, ensured her authority went unchallenged, a tactic akin to bureaucratic overreach seen in local governance disputes across the U.S. Yet the incident sparked a turning point as Harold's survival and strategic response, rooted in his FBI training, set the stage for dismantling this fraudulent system. For Americans aged 18 to 50, this story hits home, reflecting the cultural disdain for Karens who exploit rules for control and the distrust of institutions that prioritize power over people. It's a cautionary tale of how fear can silence a community, but also a rallying cry for vigilance, reminding us that unchecked authority, even in the mundane setting of an HOA, can erode the freedoms we hold dear. In the heart of Maplewood Estates, a seemingly ordinary suburban neighborhood, Harold Monroe, a 68-year-old retired FBI agent, transformed a violent assault into a masterful takedown of a corrupt HOA scheme, a story that captivates Americans with its blend of resilience and cunning. When Bradley, a fake HOA enforcer, tased Harold on a public trail, the attack wasn't just a random act of aggression, it was a misstep that played into Harold's hands. Despite his pacemaker faltering, Harold's fleeting smile as he collapsed revealed a calculated strategy, a hallmark of his FBI field operations training. His survival, against the odds, was no accident. Harold had been hunting Bradley, an ex-private contractor with a rap sheet of falsified credentials and excessive force, for years. With meticulous precision, Harold maintained a dossier labeled HOA tiered threat levels, color-coding Bradley as a Level 2 threat and Karen, the HOA president, as Level 3. These files, stored in a locked metal box alongside a faded FBI badge and flash drives, contain surveillance logs, neighbor movement patterns, and audio evidence of Karen hiring Bradley for behavioral compliance. Harold's coordination with Fox, an active FBI contact, ensured Bradley's movements were tracked, revealing his history of exploiting HOA power vacuums across neighborhoods. This strategic foresight resonates with Americans aged 18 to 50 who admire the archetype of the seasoned hero outsmarting adversaries, a trope celebrated in films like Taken. Harold's silence in the hospital, where he prioritized coded phrases like Fisherman's Cove over emotional reassurance, underscored his operative mindset, raising his son as an asset rather than a traditional child. Yet this wasn't cold detachment, it was preparation, as evidenced by a handwritten note in a contingency file. If you're reading this, you passed. This moment, where Harold entrusted his son with a key to unlock the final lock, symbolizes a legacy transfer, a narrative that strikes a chord with Americans valuing family and duty. Harold's plan culminated in a staged compliance test, baiting Bradley with a non-compliant shed to draw him into an FBI ambush, proving his impersonation of law enforcement in illegal surveillance. For a U.S. audience, this tale of a retired agent leveraging his expertise to dismantle corruption mirrors cultural reverence for justice and vigilance, especially in suburban settings where HOAs can symbolize overreach. Harold's story isn't just about survival, it's about turning the tables on fear, a lesson that inspires a generation to stand firm against false authority. In the suburban enclave of Maplewood Estates, a sinister scheme orchestrated by Karen, the HOA president, and her enforcer Bradley, revealed the chilling extent of community manipulation and surveillance, a narrative that strikes a nerve with Americans wary of eroded personal freedoms. Karen's HOA regime thrived on fear, using fake bylaws and citations to control residents, from fining Mrs. Talbot for wind chimes to penalizing balloon arches as safety hazards. These trivial infractions, enforced by Bradley's intimidating presence, complete with a homemade HOA compliance unit badge in zip ties, mirrored the overreach Americans often criticize in bureaucratic systems. The duo's tactics escalated with unauthorized surveillance, evidenced by a hidden camera pole with a blinking red light in Harold Monroe's backyard, capturing confrontations to bolster their fabricated citations. This invasion of privacy echoes cultural anxieties about surveillance, particularly among younger Americans who value autonomy in an era of smart devices and data tracking. Karen's manipulation extended to HOA finances, with an Excel sheet uncovering $9,800 paid to Bradley for behavioral compliance and vague expenses like $243.50 for pylon maintenance, siphoned from residents' dues. Her bylaws, amended through obscure footnotes and unpublicized votes, consolidated her power, a tactic reminiscent of local governance scandals that frustrate U.S. communities. A chilling memo tied to Bradley's payment, "Keep him scared, keeps the others quiet," exposed her strategy of psychological control, exploiting the neighborhood's silence as neighbors like Mrs. Talbot watched incidents unfold without intervening. This dynamic reflects suburban America's tendency to avoid conflict, a cultural norm Karen weaponized. Bradley's nighttime window peering with thermal gear and Karen's flyers targeting non-compliant homes further entrenched their surveillance state, creating a panopticon-like atmosphere. For Americans aged 18 to 50, this story resonates with viral HOA horror tales on platforms like Reddit, where Karen stereotypes symbolize petty tyranny. The community's initial complicity, driven by fear of fines or social ostracism, underscores a broader societal tension, the balance between conformity and resistance. Yet the discovery of these abuses, through Harold's files and flash drives, sparked a turning point. The narrator's exposure of Karen's financial misconduct and surveillance at an HOA meeting shattered her facade, empowering neighbors to voice their grievances. This awakening mirrors American ideals of grassroots rebellion, celebrated in town hall confrontations and social media movements. Maplewood's story is a cautionary tale of how surveillance and manipulation can infiltrate even the most mundane settings, urging vigilance against false authority in our backyards. In the suburban battleground of Maplewood Estates, the narrator, Harold Monroe's son, undergoes a profound transformation from a reluctant bystander to a decisive force in dismantling a corrupt HOA scheme, a journey that resonates with Americans aged 18 to 50 who value personal growth and family legacy. Initially overwhelmed when Bradley, a fake HOA enforcer, tases his father on a public trail, the narrator's panic is palpable. His hands shake, unable to find a pulse as Harold's pacemaker falters. Yet this crisis awakens skills Harold instilled through years of unconventional training, from field stripping a Glock to memorizing emergency codes like Fisherman's Cove. These drills, once dismissed as overzealous, become the narrator's lifeline, reflecting a cultural reverence for preparedness seen in American survivalist ethos. The narrator's first act of agency, dialing Harold's emergency line on a flip phone, triggers a chain of events, connecting him with Fox, an FBI contact, and revealing Harold's covert operation against Bradley and Karen, the HOA president. This moment, where he recalls the code sequence, line 3, Fox first, marks his shift 50, marking his shift from fear to purpose, a narrative arc that mirrors coming-of-age stories beloved in U.S. cinema, like The Karate Kid. As the conflict escalates, the narrator confronts Bradley directly, stepping into his space during a backyard standoff over a fabricated vegetation encroachment violation, channeling Harold's lessons in holding the line. This courage, though unpolished, earns Harold's subtle approval. "You held the line. That was enough." A nod that carries weight for Americans who cherish understated familial pride. The narrator's growth peaks when he unlocks Harold's contingency box, finding a binder with surveillance logs and a note. "If you're reading this, you passed." This symbolic passing of the torch, sealed with a key Harold hands him, evokes the American ideal of inheriting duty, akin to a soldier taking up a fallen comrade's mission. At the HOA meeting, the narrator takes center stage, presenting damning evidence from flash drives, audio of Karen hiring Bradley for $9,800, financial records of siphoned dues, methodically dismantling her empire. His calm delivery, clicking through slides exposing $740 for a non-existent fleet, galvanizes neighbors to speak out, reflecting the grassroots empowerment celebrated in U.S. town hall victories. For a generation navigating distrust in institutions, the narrator's evolution from doubt to action is a rallying cry, amplified by cultural disdain for Karens, who wield false authority. His choice to stay in the fight, not because Harold dragged him in, but because he wants to ruin the game they built, underscores a shift from obligation to conviction. This resonates with younger Americans who champion authenticity over conformity, as seen in social media movements against bureaucratic overreach. The narrator's journey, rooted in Harold's training yet driven by his own resolve, transforms him into a community voice, not through formal power, but through earned trust, embodying the American dream of rising through courage and truth. In the quiet streets of Maplewood Estates, a meticulously orchestrated takedown of a corrupt HOA scheme unfolded, transforming a suburban neighborhood into a battleground for justice, a story that electrifies Americans aged 18 to 50 with its blend of strategy and public reckoning. The catalyst was a staged compliance test, where Harold Monroe, a retired FBI agent, and his son, the narrator, rebuilt a shed 1 inch taller and 2 inches longer than HOA regulations, baiting Bradley, a fake enforcer, into overstepping. This deliberate provocation, complete with forged HOA paperwork bearing Karen's signature, was a trap set with the precision of a sting operation, resonating with American audiences who relish gotcha moments in shows like Dateline. On the morning of the confrontation, Bradley arrived, clipboard and zip ties in hand, sporting a new Field Director Enforcement Division badge, only to be met by Fox, an FBI contact, and a team poised to arrest him. The charges, impersonating law enforcement, illegal surveillance, and assault with a prohibited device, were backed by Harold's dossier, including video footage from a shed camera and audio of Karen hiring Bradley for $9,800 to enforce behavioral compliance. This evidence, meticulously gathered, mirrors the American fascination with uncovering corruption, as seen in true crime podcasts. The narrator's pivotal role came at the HOA meeting, where he presented a slideshow exposing Karen's financial misconduct. 740 monthly deposits for a non-existent fleet, 1,200 to her nephew for vague liaison work, and a memo instructing Bradley to keep residents scared. This public unmasking, delivered with calm resolve, shattered Karen's authority, a moment akin to courtroom dramas that captivate U.S. viewers. Neighbors, once silenced by fear, erupted with grievances. Mrs. Talbot cited fines for wind chimes, another for a birthday balloon arch, reflecting the grassroots rebellion celebrated in American town halls and social media campaigns against petty tyrants. Karen's desperate lunge at an agent's file and her claim of sovereign chartered ground only deepened her fall, as the HOA vice president Doug moved to dissolve the board, seconded by residents emboldened by the narrator's evidence. This collective stand, where no one voted against Karen's removal, embodies the American ideal of community empowerment, echoing historic moments like colonial town meetings. Bradley's arrest, as he shouted about protecting the neighborhood, and Karen's retreat into headlines and a frozen discretionary fund, marked the collapse of their empire. For a generation wary of institutional overreach, this takedown, executed legally, smartly, and loudly, as Harold's note advised, offers a blueprint for dismantling false authority. The story's climax, where the narrator's evidence frees Maplewood from fear, resonates with cultural disdain for Karen's, and celebrates the triumph of truth over manipulation, a narrative that inspires Americans to challenge control in their own backyards. The resolution of the Maplewood Estates HOA scandal marked a triumphant reclaiming of community power, a narrative that resonates deeply with Americans aged 18 to 50 who champion collective action and the dismantling of oppressive systems. After the dramatic takedown of Karen and Bradley's corrupt regime, the neighborhood transformed from a place of fear to one of renewed agency, reflecting the American ideal of grassroots empowerment. Karen, the once omnipotent HOA president, vanished from public view, her house dark and her clipboard abandoned, symbolizing the collapse of her authoritarian grip. The exposure of her financial misconduct, $9,800 paid to Bradley for behavioral compliance, $740 for a non-existent fleet, through the narrator's slideshow at the HOA meeting, shattered the spell of compliance she had cast over residents. Neighbors, previously silenced by fines for trivialities like wind chimes or garden gnomes, found their voices, with Mrs. Talbot and others recounting their grievances in a cathartic outpouring that echoed the town hall rebellions celebrated in American culture, from colonial meetings to modern social media campaigns. The unanimous vote to dissolve the corrupt board, led by Doug, the unassuming vice president in socks and sandals, underscored a collective rejection of fear-based control, a moment that mirrors the U.S. reverence for democratic pushback against tyranny. Doug's new leadership, though quirky, prioritized transparency, ensuring the HOA served the community rather than ruled it, a shift that aligns with the values of younger Americans who distrust institutional overreach. The narrator, without seeking formal authority, emerged as a trusted voice, fielding neighbors' questions about violations and rights, embodying the quiet heroism of those who lead by example. This role, earned through his courage in presenting evidence and standing up to Bradley, reflects the American dream of influence through integrity, not power. Karen's downfall, marked by headlines and a frozen discretionary fund, served as a public warning, her name etched in the county's misconduct log as a cautionary tale. Bradley's arrest for impersonating law enforcement and illegal surveillance further dismantled the fear apparatus, with his plea deal exposing his fragility outside the HOA's fabricated hierarchy. The community's newfound freedom was palpable. Drones once signaling danger now flew harmlessly, and the wind carried no threats, only the promise of a clearer sky. This resolution resonates with a generation that celebrates Karen takedowns on platforms like Reddit, where stories of bureaucratic overreach ignite calls for justice. Maplewood's transformation, driven by the narrator's evidence and Harold's strategic legacy, underscores the power of collective vigilance, a theme that echoes in American narratives from Aaron Brockovich to local zoning battles. By breaking the cycle of fear, the residents reclaimed their neighborhood, proving that truth and unity can topple even the most entrenched false authority, inspiring others to stand firm in their own communities.